Okay, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
I'm ready, man. Let's roll.
I'm just going to go with the USC topic right off the top
Let's
here
go.
to get us going since we've been talking about USC this year and next year, 25 and 26, the only two
Yeah.
seasons left on the current contract series between Notre Dame and USC. So if they don't keep playing, does Notre Dame need to do anything else to its schedule in terms of adding anyone, or is the Clemson series enough to fill that void?
So I think the answer is yes, they do have to do something to fill it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same team 12 years in a row like they did with Clemson. But I do think that they need to get somebody else or some multiple somebody's else. That doesn't sound like good English. But they're going to need multiple people to fill that void because look, USC, whether they're up, they're down, they're in the middle, whatever, that's still a marquee game for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. It just is. Like, I can't remember the last time Notre Dame played USC in the afternoon. You know what I mean? Like, it's a marquee game. It just is. And so that game needs to be replaced by something to continue to have a good schedule. Now, the retractors will say, doesn't matter what your schedule looks like as long as you win all of your games. But then those exact same people will be like, well, this schedule sucks. This is boring. There's no good games on it. But then Notre Dame went 11-1 or whatever and got into the playoff. I still think you need to beef up the schedule a little bit. It can't be a complete joke, regardless of what Michigan did in 23. It can't be a complete joke. Like, you have to have some meat on the bone. And Clemson by itself doesn't do that. Now, they have Texas and they've got Alabama and they've got all these different, and I get that, but they've got that already in place. And so I think you need to add to it a little bit. I do.
I think my first call would be UCLA, just to see what their interest would be, because it is still important for Notre Dame to get to Southern California every couple of years. I mean, like keeping Stanford on the schedule is obviously important to them, and that's not even Southern California, that's Northern California. But if being in LA every couple of years is important, I would at least kick the tires on UCLA, see what the interest is. I don't know that their interest would necessarily be that much more than what USC's would, but at the same time, UCLA is a program that needs some exposure of its own, and playing Notre Dame regularly would give them some exposure. The other option I would look at, if UCLA is not a viable option, Notre Dame has never played a Shamrock Series game in Los Angeles. They played Navy in San Diego a few years back, but they've never played a Shamrock Series game in Los Angeles. And I would look at the potential of a Shamrock Series game, bring some, whoever it is, maybe it's Arizona State or Arizona, since they're in the Big 12 now, or even Colorado, somebody bring them into Los Angeles and, maybe play a Shamrock Series game every couple of years down there. I think that because you wouldn't do it at the Coliseum, you would do it at SoFi. And I think that SoFi would be, would chomp at the bit to have an opportunity to have Notre Dame play somebody there every once in a while.
Yeah, so you need something on the schedule. And again, it doesn't need to be the same school every year. Like, it doesn't need to be that, but you need to add something. You can't just add a Tennessee State or a Kent State or something like that, or a San Diego State, as somebody put it. Like, you can't just add a group of 6 team to the schedule and be like, okay, we replaced USC.
Needs to be somebody with a little bit of teeth. Doesn't have to be, like a Clemson or a Georgia or an Alabama or a Texas.
But it's got to be, it's got to be something, man. Like, you can't just let that one go by the wayside and fill it in with fluff.
Yeah, exactly. On the subject of scheduling, you and I are generally out on the idea of Notre Dame and Indiana meeting on the football field.
Yeah.
Now, I floated an idea last week with Jesse. Picture this: a Shamrock takeover of Indianapolis. Saturday, this would be a weekend in November. On Saturday, it's Notre Dame Indiana football at Lucas Oil. Sunday, you get a men's and women's basketball doubleheader, Notre Dame Indiana at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Scale of 1 to 10. What's your level of love for that?
So when I originally read this question, when you first sent it over, I was like, this is dumb. I don't want to do it. This is like a 2. I'm very anti this idea. Then I started to think about it. And I started to think about it from a fan's perspective, right? And I started to think about it from the perspective of, would I want to go cover the football game one day and then the next day do both basketball games? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would actually enjoy it, but it's going to have to be like once every 5 years.
Yeah, and it's not an annual thing.
Okay.
But like
I did want to clarify that. Okay.
Do it at least once, like
right.
And like what I'd said with Jesse, like you could do this with multiple, like other schools,
sure.
like in other cities as well. Like you could do it with Ohio State and Cleveland, like where everybody's out there. All those facilities are pretty close to each other, just like Indianapolis. Or you could do it with Michigan, up in Detroit, or something to that effect. But like it just feels like if like they're going to play Indiana here in a few years, and you don't, and we've talked about the pros and cons of playing Indiana in the regular season, and it just feels like you could get like a ton of fan interest doing it in a 2-day setting like that, where you've got football one day, men's and women's basketball the next day, where like from the basketball perspective especially, it feels like those games would be pretty competitive.
So, Andrew, I just want to pull this up because this is part of the next part of my but thing I wanted to bring up. He says, I like it. I think it would be an Indiana home game, though. Big Ten tournament, Indianapolis is heavy Indiana. I agree with that on the Sunday part of it. The basketball would probably be very pro-Indiana, as it was every time Notre Dame played in that Crossroads Classic. Remember, it was Indiana, Purdue, Notre Dame, and Butler. And it would always be a sea of red down there. It just always was. On Saturday, though, that's going to be more pro Notre Dame, I think, because there's more Notre Dame football fans than there are IU football fans. Mm-hmm. As much as like we heard about IU was going to take over the stadium on, during the playoff, it didn't happen. That did not happen. Okay.
And if it's a Shamrock Series game, Notre Dame still controls the
correct. Yes. Also a very solid point. So I think it would be pro Notre Dame for football. It would be pro IU for the basketball side, more the men's than the women's, but it would be. And if it's a doubleheader, you're obviously buying a ticket to both. You know what I mean?
Again, because now NBC carries Big Ten, both football and basketball. So like the relationship with Notre Dame and the Big Ten, NBC could televise all this stuff Saturday,
correct,
and Sunday, because obviously they don't have NFL games to worry about until the primetime game Sunday night. So like you tip off the first game at noon on Sunday. The second one tips off at 2:30. You're done by 5 o'clock. You're wrapping up the whole thing, and then you still got 3 hours until NFL Sunday night rolls around and all that stuff.
I would be for it. I think that would be a fun weekend in Indianapolis, to be perfectly honest with you. You drive down Saturday morning, you go to the football game, stay overnight, do the 2 basketball games, drive back Sunday. I'm kind of all for it, to be perfectly honest with you. I think
hotels would be full. Here you go. Indianapolis would love it.
listen, here you go. Here's the thought, right? If you're going to lose the USC thing, right? Thanksgiving weekend. That's Thanksgiving weekend in Indianapolis.
Now, I mentioned that, and somebody countered that with state high school football.
Ooh, that's a solid point. No,
because I said you could do it like Black Friday, play the football game, and then the basketball game on Saturday. But
literally, they play football Friday and Saturday. So
exactly.
You're absolutely right. You couldn't do that. So maybe a weekend before or a weekend after or whatever. But yeah, I think it's a doable thing. Again, wouldn't want it every year, but that was me. Acknowledge me.
It was I am Tenzin, son of Aang. You are acknowledged.
Man, you nailed it. That is absolutely
best point you've had.
That's a great point. I forgot. How do I forget about high school football? Oh, that's right, because I've never coached a state champion. But whatever. So yes, I think it's a good idea as a novelty, not as a
not a regular thing.
You're right.
Not an every year thing by any means.
Right.
But like once. Even if it's once every 10 years, I think that, I think that you could generate a lot of buzz and excitement around doing all that in one city that. And then, like I said, like you could go to Chicago. Like, I don't know that Notre Dame and Illinois would generate, as much buzz, but again,
but there's other pockets.
Maybe it's like Notre Dame and Michigan, and you do that in Chicago, like with all the, because like Michigan's right there.
Sure.
But
You do it at Ford Field, you know,
Yeah.
you can do it in Detroit. Like I wouldn't have a problem with that. And you'd still have, yes, it would be obviously more home game-ish for Michigan, no doubt about it. But you'd get plenty of Notre Dame fans up there as well. There's no, you would.
Right. And you'd sell out the basketball games. It wouldn't be like,
You
like
would.
I mean, I think you'd sell out all three, to be quite honest.
I agree.
Like,
especially Michigan, Notre Dame football. Come on.
Yeah. Cause like there's some, like we went to, like the women did the Shamrock games in St. Louis and Washington, D.C. And, they had good crowds. I don't know if I don't think that they were necessarily, packed to the brim. The place in Washington, D.C. was a little bit smaller venue. It was one of those G League, WNBA smaller venues, but like you would easily sell out Gainbridge Fieldhouse if you were doing IU and Notre Dame there, especially if it's a men's women's doubleheader on the same day. So, all right. I'm glad I brought you around to that because again, I'm like you. Like I don't see the benefit in like the Crossroads Classic ran its course.
It did. It got,
but now it's also been a while since they've done the Crossroads Classic.
No,
so
I
think you let enough time go by and you build up some interest once again, and you do, again, like a one-off deal every however many years. I mean, before last year, it had been forever since Notre Dame. I think it had been since around 88, 89 that Notre Dame and Indiana had played in football.
Yep.
So
I mean, every once in a while, it's okay to take little brother out to the woodshed. Like I'm okay
right.
with it, just not every year because then that's just bullying, and we're not
right.
We're not a fan of that.
I like that joke. Kansas City with Nebraska and Notre Dame. That's not a bad idea. I don't see, but again, like I don't know, like if it's just football, then that would go over. But like if you were doing Notre Dame, Nebraska, like basketball doubleheader in Kansas City, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how to draw
how much interest that would be.
Yeah, you've got
Missouri, like if you did it with Missouri, maybe, or even Kansas.
Kansas would be.
I'm going to throw because
Kansas would be pretty big.
Right. The men's program at Notre Dame probably wants to build itself back up a little
before
bit.
They
like
schedule that one.
Like the Kansas women have been to the NCAA tournament the last couple of years. So,
and the Kansas football
football program is obviously better.
They've elevated.
Yeah. I think if it was Kansas or Missouri in Kansas City, you'd get some pretty decent interest in that.
Yeah, you need to have
in both the football and the basketball.
Right, you need to have at least a draw from both football and basketball. Like that, you've got to figure out how that would work and which schools that would work with because some of it just wouldn't. Right. It just wouldn't.
Exactly.
Work,
Exactly.
But yeah, that one would.
Yep. So Notre Dame has 3 primetime home games this season. Over under 3.5 primetime road games the Irish will have this year.
Well, and of course, when I read this the first time, I was like, I need to check out the schedule to make sure that
always a good idea.
Had this right.
The teams are.
So obviously, we know Miami game is already going to be at night, right? So that one's set in stone. So we got one for sure. Right. The other away games, and this is where it gets interesting. So I think it's a toss-up as to whether Arkansas will be a night game or not. I think Notre Dame has a decent shot of being 3-0 at that point. Arkansas' schedule is a little bit like they've got, I think, Bethune-Cookman or something. I can't remember exactly who it is, but they've got a very winnable game. They have a chance to be like 2-1 or something along those lines. So that could be a night game for sure, right? Then the away games leave a little something to be desired. You got Boston College, you got Pitt, and you got Stanford. Stanford sometimes is a night game just because it's in California, not because Stanford is any good.
Right.
So
typically it is a night game. Just because
it is. So that's maybe 3 at that point. And then to put it in the over, either Boston College or Pitt would need to be a night game. I'm going to take the under here and say that they're not going to have 4 away night games. I'll take the under 3.5 and feel fairly good about it.
And honestly, after I set 3.5, I went, maybe I should have set it at 2.5.
Yeah.
But because there are only 5 road games. And the thing about Boston College and Pittsburgh, when they've played Notre Dame, they've played at noon before. They've played at 8:30 before. They've also played at 3:30.
And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it either, by the way.
Yeah. It's just kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
with those two. You know, like when they've gone to Pittsburgh, they've played both day games and night games. And, you know, like BC is kind of sneaky. Like they were, I think, a little bit better last year in year one under O'Brien than maybe some people thought they were going to be. But, you know, like, are they going to keep it going this year? And then, like you said, with Stanford, like the earliest, I think, wasn't it like 7:00 a couple years ago? Wasn't that the earliest probably that we've ever had a Stanford game when it's in Palo Alto?
Because I mean, that's the thing. It's a 3-hour time difference anyway. So if you're lucky, it'll be a 3:30 game because that's a noon, 12:30 start for them. So it's not going to be a noon game. So your only options are 3:30 or 7:30, right?
Yeah.
So the odds are pretty good that it's probably going to be a night game. And
I'm going to go,
Notre Dame's last game. And potentially, if they win it, they go to the play. You know what I mean? So there would be intrigue there regardless of the opponent.
I'm going to go under. I think Miami and Arkansas probably are. And then maybe, Stanford probably ends up being a primetime game just because it's on the West Coast. But other than that, I'm not seeing a fourth game. So, no, I'll go under as well. So after they released their game times yesterday, do you like the fact that they announce all the kickoff times before the season? You know, like we get into the season for these road games and we're typically waiting to find out what time is it going to kick. They make this decision as the season goes on. So do you like that Notre Dame just sets their times in stone before the season ever starts? Or would you like them to keep it more flexible to allow for better primetime matchups if they become available along the way?
So I love it because I like a schedule. Like I like to know what's coming.
This is true. Vince does not like gray spaces. Vince wants it black or white. Vince does not like middle ground.
I don't. I hate it.
It's got to be one extreme or the other. He wants everything to be set in stone 8 months in advance. He wants no deviations. So that's true. I asked the wrong guy this question.
It's true, man. I like to know. It's why I make the schedule for this show like a month in advance because I like to have it set out so we know what's happening. And I feel the same way about the football games. Like I've got a spreadsheet. One of my tabs up here, right here, is my spreadsheet for the fall. And it's got the high school football games, my son's games, and Notre Dame games, and all the times. And so I know which ones I'm going to be able to hit and how I'm going to do it. And I like to have that plan in my head, ahead of time. So when the schedule came out the other day, I was like, yes, I get to fill in some of my spreadsheet. Like it was a dork's dream. So I like it. I do. I wish they would do that for the away games so we could at least. And I will say this: I don't travel to the away games very often, right? It would mess with my brain not knowing when a game is going to be that I would be traveling to. When you consider like flights and car rides and all of those different things, it's like,
well, and that's kind of what Andrew was saying. Like because of all the national fan base that travels into Notre Dame, would it affect them that much? Like I guess the biggest effect would be if it's a 3:30 game as opposed to an 8:30 or 7:30 game or whatever. If it's a 3:30 versus 7:30 game, you still have a good chance of getting out of town after the game on a Saturday night. So from that aspect to what Andrew's saying, but I mean, otherwise it's just another night in a hotel and you fly out the next day. So it would have a little bit of impact, but at the same time, like even if you waited until like mid-October or like the first week of October to announce the November kickoff times, for example.
It'd be better than it is now.
What happens if Navy loses 2 games in September and now that game is in primetime, for example?
And aren't the odds that they will? You know what I mean? Like that's why the whole Navy at night thing is so perplexing to me. You are counting on Navy to be the team that they were last year. That's more of an oddity than it is a regularity. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why that game being at night is very puzzling to me. Oh, like you're counting on them to be really, really good by that point, in the season. And look, they were really good up until, Notre Dame played them. And then they weren't in that game. And maybe that moment was too big or whatever the reason was, right? It just didn't work out that way. I don't know. I just think you're putting an awful lot of pressure on Navy. Not that those guys can't handle it, but you're putting a lot of pressure on Navy to be real good by then.
Because like even look, Florida State was the 1st of November last year, right? Or the first within the first week of November, and they stunk. And
They're awful.
Everyone had to stay at the stadium until midnight for an awful blowout game against Florida State. And so like to like same point there. Like if you waited a month,
right,
and found out to set the November game times, that changes things. Now, the other thing about last year was just the fact that like last year was literally probably the worst overall home schedule. Like I've been here for going on 25 years now. It's like the worst home schedule that I can remember. So there really wasn't a whole lot of choice. It was going to be Florida State, or like, it's not like you were going to move Virginia to primetime.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, 100%. Like that one made the most sense by far because, it's a name. Florida State is still a name. They're still a brand, and they just were a terrible football team.
Yeah, just a terrible brand.
I mean, they're just really bad.
As it turned out. Fill in the blank. It's blank that MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred today removed Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and other deceased players from Major League Baseball's permanently ineligible list.
Like, where did this come from on a Tuesday afternoon in May?
Just dropped it right in the middle of the day, too.
This is major news. This is major news that I feel like should have been more heralded than it was. Like,
Rob Manfred was just like, NFL with your schedule release. You think you're going to get some headlines?
Like,
I've got a headline for you.
I mean, save it for the All-Star break, or I don't know, Hall of Fame weekend, or something about like that, right? So the timing of it is very odd. I don't know if he was just trying to bury it or what. So the timing is very strange. It is long overdue. I will say that. For a long time, I was like, well, he cheated. It is what it is. You take your medicine, you do the time, you do the crime, do the time, right? But with the way that things have evolved now, that literally betting is the lifeblood of American sports, like, how can you keep him out of the Hall of Fame because he was betting? He was betting on his own team. I get all of that. This is still a long time overdue, in my opinion.
Part of the main rationale that Manfred used in the statement that he made this afternoon was essentially bans like Pete Rose had, will last a lifetime. Meaning, as soon as your life ends, you can now become eligible again. So basically, they're going to punish you
until you're
as long as you're alive. But once you're dead, you now become eligible.
Shoeless Joe's been dead for a long time. Like, that's not great. That's not great.
Well, it's kind of like he's been thinking about this for a while, and he was literally just waiting for Pete Rose to die. And I mean, it's only been since last October that he passed away. So
I feel like that's almost just like a knife in the wound.
That's what I was getting ready to say. It's like turn in another screw right in there, man. But like I listened to Harold Reynolds talk a little bit about it on MLB Network, and obviously Harold, had some crossover with Pete Rose in terms of their playing days and stuff like that. And like he talked about just the impact that Pete Rose had on everybody else who was playing, because everyone was paranoid about everything. He said, if you got a phone call in the clubhouse, they're like, they got to know who the call's from, and, making sure you're not, talking to a bookie, or, if you leave tickets, they got to know who the tickets are, all this different stuff. And, like what Harold said too, is basically Pete Rose kept Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame toward the end. Like he felt like Harold Reynolds felt like if Pete had backed off a little bit, like he might have actually gotten in.
Yeah, he was pushing hard towards the end. I agree with that. I do.
Yeah.
And it's tough because I don't want to you can't make like blanket statements. Well, betting's okay, but juicing wasn't. Like all of those. Like it is a touchy subject, especially for baseball people, because baseball people tend to be more like purists and things like that. So all of these conversations are very tough, right? Because like I fall on the betting thing, like that's run its course. It's time to let those guys in. But I'm also on these guys were juicing, those guys shouldn't go in. So it's like, it's not what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't even make sense when I'm saying it, but like, that's where my head is. Like, they should have let Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe in a long time ago, but I still don't think Barry Bonds should be in. You know what I mean? So it's like that it makes no sense, but that's my thought process.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm still torn on like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens,
Sure.
that whole
Yeah.
era, the steroid
It's
era.
wild, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
baseball was so much fun to watch, though. Like everybody in that summer of '98 was freaking dialed in, to the home run chase and all of that
Sosa
stuff.
McGuire. Yep.
Yeah, man. Like everybody was dialed in, and frankly,
And
everybody was dialed into Barry Bonds too. Maybe for the wrong reasons because they wanted him to fail. Some people, but like they were dialed into him too. So,
but I mean, basically, it's
know.
McGuire and Sosa's fault because they were juicing and hit
And
all
then he
those
did
home
it.
runs, and so
Yeah.
he had to
That's
one up
right.
them.
That's
so that's
right.
when he started juicing.
Because I mean, look, Barry Bonds. I know we're going down a rabbit hole here, but like Barry Bonds was an amazing baseball player before he started the juice. Like he was a Hall of Fame baseball player before he started the juice. But you can't say that the juicing didn't help.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
the problem is baseball is a very numbers sacred sport.
Yeah.
And he skewed all the numbers
Yeah.
by making that decision to do that. And,
agreed.
the record books literally are just, but the other side of that as well is, like other than a guy like Roger Clemens, for example, we don't know just how many pitchers were out there doing it themselves to, overcome injuries quicker, to get back out there on the mound and, like have their own success, even if they weren't like dominant like Roger Clemens. And like the line that I draw with Roger Clemens is, like you can also say, well, he had a great Hall of Fame, career before he did it, but he was also on the downside, which is why, he got, the Red Sox didn't re-sign him. And so he gets ticked off. He goes to Toronto. And at that point, that's where he's linked specifically, to the guy he was getting his stuff from. Then all of a sudden he goes from barely hanging on, high ERA, low strikeouts with the Red Sox to he's dominating the world with Toronto and then the Blue Jays and, winning, what was it, like 3 more Cy Youngs, before it's all said and done. So like with him, there's like a very clear line to me. Like if he didn't do it, I think his career was all but over at that point.
I think that's fair. And like I said, Barry Bonds would have been a Hall of Famer without it. Like with the stolen bases, the batting average, like everything that he was doing when he was in Pittsburgh was Hall of Fame worthy. You know what I mean? And now maybe his career wouldn't have gone as long. Obviously, he wouldn't be the home run king and like all of those things. He still would have been in the Hall of Fame, man. Like he would have worn the gold jacket or whatever, however what color the jacket is for baseball, but like he would have been there and he just took it a step too far, Yep.
All right. So the NFL continued its trickle of schedule release today. The full schedules come out on Wednesday, but they released more primetime and international games today after we found out yesterday Cowboys-Eagles is going to be the first game of the season on the Thursday. Today we found out Monday, November 10th, we've got Eagles-Packers. Interesting that they just, announced that one
like
Monday
a
night
random
game.
Monday night game in November.
November 28th, Black Friday, you've got Eagles and your Bears. Saturday, December 20th, you got Bears, Packers, and Eagles against Washington.
Random December day, by the way. Like
like the before Christmas games. And then 5 days later, you've got Chiefs and Broncos playing. So I guess my first question is they're leaning pretty heavily into the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, they're the defending Super Bowl champions. Do you like the Eagles heavy primetime games?
I mean, I could take or leave the Eagles, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't dislike watching them. I really, enjoy watching Saquon Barkley do his thing. I think he's just a generational type running back. So I enjoy.
I could have lived with, watching him with a bad Giants team as opposed to
for sure. I get that.
Making the Eagles a Super Bowl winner. But
obviously the Eagles, they're poking you in the side here, and I get that, as a Cowboys fan, and I appreciate it. I think it is a little heavy on the Eagles. I think they could have spread the love around just a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll see if the Broncos and the Commanders are any good and makes those games any good. But yeah, I'm actually surprised there's not more Chiefs games because they usually fall towards.
Yeah. Now we don't have the full like Sunday night schedule.
Right.
I'm sure there will be, but again, I get it. They're the defending Super Bowl champs, but they're not a national team. Like, I don't think that there's going to be as much interest in those. Now, They're playing the Bears. They're playing the Packers.
Sure.
They're playing Washington. I don't know how interesting that game is because Washington's not that, again.
I don't know why Eagles Commanders is like everybody wants to watch that.
But they're leaning on the Eagles. So I think that's
really
why.
are.
But I just don't see the Eagles as a national draw, defending Super Bowl champs or not. It's not, and like go back to the Baltimore Ravens. It's like when they won it, like, oh, did you want to watch more Ravens games the next year? Probably not, because that was still Joe Flacco, if you remember. But there are other like I would rather see more Buffalo Bills in prime time, for example. I'd rather see more Josh Allen or even Baltimore and Lamar Jackson now.
Well, you know what this is lacking is West Coast teams too. And
that's true. That's a very good point. These are all like the farthest west you have is the Broncos.
Right. And so for me, I don't get to watch many West Coast teams, to be perfectly honest with you, based on the way things go, right? Because we get whatever they show us. And it's usually, the Bears or the Colts, or we get one like primetime game. And so I'd like to see the Chargers, or I'd like to see the Raiders, or I'd like to see, give me some West Coast love a little bit, just because those are teams that I don't normally get to watch. And I'd like to. So that's what I would say. Like outside of wanting to watch the Bears, and usually the Bears are always available, so that's not a big deal.
I mean, outbound, I'll concede the fact that I hate the Eagles, but it's indisputable that the Eagles are not a national draw.
Correct. They're not.
They're just not. That's my point. It's not that I hate, why I'm saying this is not because I hate the Eagles, which I do.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not a national draw, is my point. I think Buffalo with Josh Allen is more of a national draw. Personally.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Or Lamar Jackson with Baltimore, and obviously Kansas City is more of a national draw. Like I was trying to think of a comp. Like when Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady, maybe they were a national draw just because they had Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Right. But like I don't think anyone's tuning in, to your point, Vince, to watch the Eagles because they've got Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts.
Right. Jalen Hurts isn't a draw for me. Like I could take or leave Jalen Hurts, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? I like to watch Saquon Barkley do his thing, but I could take or leave Jalen Hurts.
Right. If the Bears go,
I'm not sure.
Not either. The Vikings are going to be the first team to play back-to-back international games this season. They're going to face Pittsburgh in Dublin, Ireland on September 28th. Then 1 week later, they're going to stay across the pond. They're going to play Cleveland in London. Would you want to play 2 games in a row overseas, Vince?
Well, if I'm going to play 2 games overseas, which, the Jaguars have done, I think, multiple in a season, things like that, I'd rather get it out of the way 2 weeks in a row because you're not having that extensive travel twice. You've only got it once, right? Because you're staying over in Europe. And so if I've got to do 2, I want them back to back.
Yeah.
So I'll buy it from that aspect, I guess.
A little surprise. I mean, it's going to be a cool experience because you get to go to Dublin and Ireland.
Well, and that's
the whole
actually
thing.
A really good point. I know these football players are, rich and they can travel wherever they want, but this is something I would take my family
nice to do it on somebody else's dime.
For sure. I would take my family and be like, hey, man, this is going to be a family trip. We're going to Ireland. We're going to be able to sightsee. Then we're going to go to London. We'll be able to sightsee. Because, there's obviously a week between games and things like that. There's time to spend with your family, and that could be a really awesome trip. So, like I said, if you're going to do 2, I'd rather have them back to back.
Yeah, that's a good point. They haven't, because they haven't released the full schedule. I don't know where their bye week is. I would think that they would get their bye week after doing 2 weeks overseas, just because of body clock and getting readjusted and that whole thing coming back. Because like the one drawback to this whole thing is like when we went to Paris for basketball, gosh, it's been already like a year and a half ago. We're going on 2 years.
That's true.
In November. But like when we went over there, my body clock, like even like they gave us in the itinerary, they were like, for the trip over, they were like, don't sleep at this time. Try to get as much sleep as you can at this time. We're staying up here after we get, all this different stuff. And my body clock was still just shot the whole time. We were over there.
I've gone over to Europe one time and I basically wasted the entire first day sleeping. like trying to get figured out. You know what I mean? Like I didn't mean to, but that's what ended up happening. That was fine the rest of the way. But like the first day I slept and got caught up, I guess I don't know what, you don't even know the right phraseology, but like the rest of the time I was fine. And I don't remember what happened when I came home, but like I remember like wasting time sleeping, and I look back on that kind of pissed off.
Yeah. I remember like the first time when I got to Germany when I was stationed over there. Same thing. It was like we got in, they picked us up at the airport, drove us back, and I just remember crashing. And then it took like 2 weeks, I think, to get adjusted afterwards.
Sure, so, I get it.
I had 2.5 years to get adjusted, unlike you, who were probably there
like
just a week
and a half, something like that. Yeah,
that's right. So the other London games: Jets, Broncos, Rams, Jaguars. First game in Berlin is going to be Atlanta against.
That'll be
the
interesting.
Colts. Yeah,
they're playing all these in soccer stadiums, I would imagine.
Yep. First ever Madrid game, Madrid, Spain, Dolphins, and Washington. So, and I guess the Chargers still have a game in Brazil. They haven't announced who they're playing.
Oh wow,
for that one yet. So I don't know any of those, those international games. Like, do you care? Like they're 9:30 in the morning. Typically, I don't even see most of these.
I don't care
too early if it's not my team.
Because once you start watching it, you can't tell where they are anyway because you're watching a football game. And am I watching football at 9:30 in the morning? Most of the time, no. So I don't really care. I think it's cool that they're doing it, but it doesn't really move the needle for me.
I agree. And I don't know. I think the Cowboys have maybe played 1 or 2 games in London, and that's it. Because Jerry Jones won't give up a home game. I know that. Right? He doesn't want to travel.
I know. I think the Bears have gone over somewhere maybe once, but that doesn't seem like really. They don't really send the Bears away like they do some of these other teams. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I really,
They like those big market teams to be on at regular times, I think, as much as possible. I think
that's probably accurate. Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for today. Thanks again to RJ Abatia for jumping in with us today. A lot of good stuff. I felt like if you missed RJ's interview, of course, you can always go back and watch the YouTube archive, and we'll have it up, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to it there, as always, with any of our podcasts. That's right. And for those who are hanging around, waiting a little bit, longer than usual for the interview to start today, if you're one of the people who gives me a hard time about pre-recording these interviews, maybe you see the benefit in that now.
Yeah. Because you were 8 minutes late. That's or right. Whatever it ended up being, because there was technical difficulties. Stuff
happens.
And
it's a lot easier to adjust when it's recorded as opposed to live.
This is true.
I'm not complaining because RJ's always good. And as I said, fantastic. RJ is our longest running guest on the show.
That's right.
He's at the top of the leaderboard right now. RJ, NC State. Else. That's the scale.
NC State. So like scale of RJ and NC State. That's what we're talking about. Like
that's right.
Grade people. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, hit that like button before you leave, and we will talk to you tomorrow on Ivy Nation Sports Talk.